After having appeared in more than 36 films, including All the President's Men, Wall Street, The Firm, and Lincoln, Hal Holbrook was nominated in 2008 for an Academy Award for his performance in Into the Wild. He's won 5 Primetime Emmy Awards for his work in television, but Holbrook is perhaps best known for his remarkable 5-decade run of one-man shows portraying Mark Twain, for which he won a Tony Award, and which was on this very stage in 2008. As he explains in his new memoir, Harold, the Boy Who Became Mark Twain, the role evolved out of a college project developed with his first wife. And playing Twain helped him to develop both a deep appreciation for the talents of the great American novelist and also an understanding of his own life, which was marked by early loss and abuse, but also an appreciation for the small kindnesses shown to him by people who care. About the book, Robert Redford said, "If I were to conjure an image of an individual who best fits the phrase, a real American, it would be Hal Holbrook. This book shows him as a complete person. You'll be compelled by the wit and wisdom of this beautifully composed story of self-determination and survival." Appearing in conversation with Hal tonight is the very talented Carey Perloff, who is entering her 21st season as the artistic director of San Francisco's American Conservatory Theater. Please welcome Carey Perloff and Hal Holbrook to the stage.
Great. Hi.
Wow. Great to be here. So, I said to Hal last night, who was at ACT for our opening, what should we talk about? And he said, ask me one question, I can talk for 45 minutes. So now you know everything you need to know. But this is truly an incredible book, I have to say. And I hope you all get it and read it, because the first thing that amazed me, this is going to sound, this is not going to come out the way I mean it, but I thought someone must have written this book with him. It's so exquisitely written. And I said, did you write this on your own? And Hal said, I beg your pardon. But it's an incredible piece of storytelling. Cogent and specific and not unindulgent. And I'm really curious when you decided to write this and how you went about the writing process.
Well, let me first say that if the bullet train ever gets to San Francisco, you already have one right here. She's really something. She's really an extraordinary person. I've enjoyed so much just talking to her. How did I write what?
Yeah.
I'm a storyteller. I'm an actor. And when I discovered what it felt like to be on the stage, the thing that struck me more than anything else and got me hooked was, for the first time in my life, people were listening to me. The first time in my life, people were quiet and they listened to me. And that was an enormous revelation to me, a gift. It's exciting. That was my senior year in high school, in a military school. And so storytelling is what actors do, whether you're telling it in your head or trying to tell what an author wrote down on a piece of paper. And so, most actors can tell stories anyway. They go out and tell stories about what they did. And so one night, and a lot of people would say, Hal, I tell stories about my family and my upbringing. I mean, San Francisco is a very personal town to me. over the years of my life, I spent a lot of time in San Francisco off and on. And actually, I found my father in San Francisco when I was doing Magnum Force. After 18 years, I found my father, who was living in a flop house hotel on Mission Street. And I met him in a coffee shop in Venice. And that's just one of the memories I had. And so I would tell stories about my life, you know, the way we all do, and people would say, you should write a book.
Yeah, but that's easier said than done. And one of the things I'm curious about is your voice is so clear in it. Did you dictate it, or you wrote it out longhand first, and then, how does it sound so close to your own speaking voice?
Well, what I wrote on a legal tablet. I never dictated anything except when I finished writing something, I would pick up the phone and dictate what I had written to Billy Squire, who found a answering machine somewhere in Iowa that will listen to you for 2 hours. And so, yeah, it's amazing. So I call this number in Iowa, and Billy, I dictate what I wrote that night, and Billy sends it to me by fax the next day, and that's it. So people would say, you should write a book. So one night Dixie was gone somewhere, working, I guess, and my wife, and I was alone in the house. And she was so wonderful about everything, and she has pictures of the family all over, everywhere, the pictures. And she had this little picture of me, which is on the front of this book, under a lamp in the living room that I turn out every night before I go to bed. And one night I stopped, because I stop and look at that picture and that boy. And one night I stopped and I look at that boy, I think, why is that boy smiling?
After all he went through.
That boy's about 10 years old. I know what he's going through. He's at a boarding school in Connecticut run by a real strange, creepy guy who loves to beat the hell out of you. And why is he smiling? That boy is me. And so I thought, I'm going to start to write a book. And I went and I got a legal tablet, and I went in the library and I sat down, and the beginning of the book was a little different then. It said, my name is Harold. I never liked my name either, never. But I used it. I said, my name is Harold. When I was 7 years old, they sent me away to school to make a boy of me.
But the first sentence of this book just stops your heart. He says, I'm trying to remember being held by my mother. It just broke my heart. And you had an incredibly difficult childhood. Your mother went off to pursue being an actor, and I think you saw her once come home tap dancing at your house. And your father had huge mental health issues, as you just said, and was always on the street and on the lam, and you were looked after by your grandmother and went to a really violent and challenging school. It's just remarkable that you came out with a sense of humor. But I wondered whether it does feel like often people who end up in the theater are looking for another family or a different family, and that there are a lot of theater people who've had really bruising childhoods. And I wondered if you found that along the way as you rebelled and decided to become an actor, which his family did not want him to do, of course.
I think it would be true that people who have not had a traditional upbringing, and maybe they've had kind of an indifferent family life, seem to be drawn to the arts. I mean, because we want to express ourselves. We want to be heard. We want to be somebody. This play last night. I saw the opening night of the play. It was very affecting. And, it talks about all these moments in history and moments in human life. I've just about finished the second book, which is much longer than this, too long, and they're going to cut it to pieces when the editor gets the piece. But you have these little moments of clarity in your life. Once in a great while, just, oh. And I had a moment like that a few months ago, because I've had a great struggle. My children, my two oldest children who were born in this book, had a very tough time with me, really tough, really tough. I was not a good father. I was totally committed to earning some money to make a living and be an actor. And I'm trying to understand, trying to be fair to them, understand them. I understand why I was brought up the way I was brought up, in an old-fashioned way, And suddenly, one day, I realized I don't remember ever being hugged by anyone until I was about 20 years old.
Oh, my God.
I don't ever remember that anyone ever hugged me. It doesn't mean they were not nice to me or kind to me, but my grandfather, who brought me up when our parents disappeared, was very stern. We loved him. He was our savior, but he was very stern. The thing I remember most about him, the affection from him, was he put his hand on the top of my head and called me buddy. I could feel his hand on the top of my head now. It was such a wonderful feeling of being okayed, When I was in boarding school from 7 years old for 4 years with this guy that liked to beat the hell out of you, I mean, nobody hugged you there.
And then you had an unbelievable wartime experience.
What?
A wartime. I wanted to talk a little about the war. I mean, one of the things, every time you think it can't get worse in this book, something else happens. And when you escaped from that terrible school with the awful principal who beat you, and I finally thought, oh, good, he's safe. And then you end up at military school.
Yeah.
That was with unbelievably brutal conditions.
I was brought up by people. My people came from New England, if you'll excuse me. They came into Weymouth, Massachusetts in 1632. And
they never smiled again.
They haven't changed since. They burnt people at the stake who did not, who were heretics. I mean, my people burned a lot of people at the stake. So, they had a very clear idea of what was right and what was wrong. So growing up in an environment like that was not cheerful. Nobody was telling Jewish jokes, you know what I mean?
Or any
Except
joke.
the wrong kind, So, I grew up with every kind of racism and dislike for other people. I grew up with narrow-minded American traditions. That's what I grew up with.
Did it change?
And Mark Twain has been a Thanksgiving feast for me.
Right.
Because all he ever talked about is what I grew up with that I didn't really like very much.
So let's get to Twain, but I just want to capture this middle bit, your wartime experiences, because I thought that it was so incredibly vivid, both your sense as an American once you left for the war, and the physical, incredibly difficult physical challenges, and then in the middle of it, ending up at Harvard, being sent by the Army to study at Harvard. It was such a strange period in your life, and I wondered if it was why afterwards, when you became an actor, you felt that you had to make up for lost time, or that there's a sense of urgency that, you know, you lost that time in your life.
Yeah, there was.
Yeah.
Yes, I've often thought it was kind of weird that when I got out of the war, I was 21 years old. I got 3 years in World War II. I actually wanted to get out of college because I wanted to go to work. It's unheard of, I know, but I wanted to get out of college and go to work. So, I mean, I finished college in 3 years instead of 4 years. I went in the summer, I did everything I could. And I wanted to go to work, and I was very fortunate to have a wonderful man, the head of the theater department at my university, Denison University in Ohio, who came out of Chautauqua, who was born out of the theater, and he was a theater person through and through. And he taught me, the first thing, when you were studying under Ed Wright, the first course you had to take, called Introduction to the Theater, and it traced the theater from the caveman coming home and telling the stories right up to our town, you know, to Barrymore. And you develop a respect for this profession. Not something you say, look at me, or I'm a movie star. A respect for the people in this profession who have suffered through it, like Edmund Kean, who suffered through it and lived through it and been able to achieve something, usually out of a terrible I mean, look at Edmund Kean. I mean, Edmund Kean had a baby and a wife, and he started down on the Cornish Peninsula with a cart that he had to pull by hand. And he pulled that cart with his baby and his wife all the way up into the Northumberland area of England, all the way by hand. And then back down to London, and he'd been begging and begging to try to get a shot at Drury Lane or whatever. And finally, you know, they were desperate for somebody, and they put him on one night as Shylock. And he played Shylock as a human being. Not only in a black wig, but I mean, as a human being. And the young critic named William Hazlitt happened to be in the audience that day. And people in those days, people were so impressed with what this unknown guy was doing, they went out in the street and said, come on in here, come in and watch this. Can you imagine? Well, anyway, you know, you read a story like that, and you realize you're part of a long tradition of tough, desperate people.
And this one, I mean, your tough, desperate road across America, doing your duos with your first wife, creating new scenes every day and driving 1,000 miles across a desert or whatever to some women's club where there were 12 people, or horrible, enormous high schools with all the children screaming in the front, and you would do a 9 a.m. show, get done at 10:30 and drive another 500 miles and do a second show. I think that's almost as good as Edmund Kean.
Yeah. Maybe not 500, but
I was exhausted just reading it.
We drove all the time. We drove and drove and drove. Ruby and me, my first wife, and I met her in Newfoundland when I was in the war. And Ed got us a job, and we had to play high school. Well, they weren't even high schools. We played 307 schools in the Southwest in 30 weeks. Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arkansas, Louisiana. 307 shows in 30 weeks. We played 2 and 3 shows a day in different towns. There were no interstates then. You know, it was 2-lane highways or butane trucks, and you had to try to get around them because you had to drive 80 miles an hour to make the show. The next show, we do the first show around 8 in the morning, and carry your own trunks in. Nobody helped you. We had costumes and makeup. We did a scene from Hamlet. Well, we didn't do that in the high school too much. We do, you know, As
Queen
You Like It. I put a
Elizabeth.
couple of the scenes together, you know, and we did Victoria Regina, the shaving scene. We did the Brownings for women's clubs, not for the kids. And, you know, we do Hamlet sometimes. And we ended with Mark Twain, this corny sketch with Mark Twain being interviewed. And that was our get off with your life number. And then you finish the show and you put your stuff back in the trunk and carry the 2 trunks out to the station wagon and jump in the car and drive, you know, 70, 80 miles an hour to the next town. And the first show we did was in Amarillo, Texas, in the morning. Then later in the morning, we played Pampa, Texas. And then in the afternoon, we played Borga, Texas. That was the first day's work.
Unbelievable.
That's what it was like. And you learn to survive on the stage.
Yes.
And you learn to try to hold an audience attention somehow. And we weren't always on the stage. We had to, in those days.
You were in cafeterias.
You know,
and
in those days, they would have a basketball court.
Right.
And they would have a stage on one side of it. And they would have the audience bleachers on the other. So you were playing across a basketball court.
It's good you have a fabulous voice.
We finally decided this didn't work. So I said, Ruby, let's just set up and play on the basketball floor and get close to the people. So that's what you had to do. You had to just make do.
Well, as I say, about 200 pages of this book is Hal driving like a maniac to make his next date. And then you get to New York. And then the story I loved so much is when you realized you should get a little formal theater training, and you went to study with Uta Hagen.
Oh.
And you have to just share that a little with the audience, because I was so outraged on your behalf reading the way she behaved when you went to that class.
I had a couple of friends. One of them I had to tour with when Ruby was pregnant. We moved to New York in 1952 with a little tiny baby, $200 in the bank, no family to help us, nothing. And I pounded my feet off looking for work and couldn't find it. Nobody paid any attention. So anyway, one of my friends said, what you need to do is to go to an acting class. I don't want to go to acting class. I've been out on the stage acting for 4 years. Hal, you may have developed some bad habits. Okay.
Thank
You could
so
do
much.
some acting class. You mean your method? Because in those days it was, you know, Marlon Brando had
psychological.
inspired everybody. And so I said, oh, Christ, okay, all right. So she said, now Uta Hagen, how much does it cost? Well, it's $15 a lesson. Oh, gosh, okay. So I went down to the meatpacking district of New York to Uda's class. Now, Uta is a great actress. Not necessarily the most friendly person you ever met. Matter of fact, she scared the hell out of me. And then I would sit in the class, and then people would get up and they would, I didn't know what method and all this stuff, I didn't know about them. They would get up, and before they did a scene, they would go and lean against the wall.
To prepare, yes.
Lean against the wall, and they would lean against the wall for the longest time, quietly, and everybody would sit and watch them leaning against the wall, and I'm thinking,
For
what the hell are they
$15 a
doing?
class.
They're getting into themselves. Okay, so when I got up on the stage, I went up and leaned against the wall and said, okay, I'm leaning against the wall. Everybody's watching me. I'm getting into myself, but myself has run away and doesn't want to have anything to do with this place because it's going to be murdered.
And then she was so abusive to everybody, all the actors, and kept saying, come back and do it again, do it again. And I think you just left and never went back, right?
She was really good. You know, some people.
Some people must have learned
I was
something.
brought up to sit at the feet of some god. I just wasn't. I wasn't brought up that way. I don't mean I was arrogant to people, but I didn't like people to put me down. I don't care who they were. You know, I just didn't like it. If I felt somebody wasn't.
Well, that's what I said to you reading this. There's a great spirit of rebelliousness in this book, which I loved. And the second episode, which is even more priceless, is when you were invited to meet the great Lee Strasberg at his house.
Me where?
You went to Lee Strasberg's apartment.
Oh, God.
And this story was unbelievable. And the wife ushers you in as if you're going to see the Pope. And he looks at your resume. This is a man who spent 4 years traveling America acting. And he says, did they pay you for that?
Yeah.
And then I think he said, what have you been doing? And you said, summer stock, 7 years of summer stock. And he said, we'll try to overlook that.
Yeah, we'll try to overlook that.
And you said, I don't think so, and walked out the door.
I looked right at him. You know, I was looking at God, you know. I knew I was doing myself a bad turn, but I looked at him and I said, I don't know why you should. And I turned and walked out and never went back. I never went back.
Never went back. Because first of all, you have a natural instrument, so that's a great gift as an actor, and you have a huge imagination. So you obviously figured out in some way how to train yourself. But there are moments in the book that are interesting where you become introspective about your own acting ability and wonder if you are really being authentic to yourself or wanting to play roles that are not character roles, right? But leading men, in that whole sequence in the summer when you decided to take on leading men for the first time.
Yeah, I had a really, I had a very tough time because, as an actor, because very early on, I mean, for my very first role, I played a 70-year-old man in a hunting lodge in George M. Cohan's 7 Keys to Baldpate. I guess I was imitating my grandfather. So they would put me in character parts. You know, I love character parts, whether it's Faker England in room service, whatever. I would love character parts. I love hiding behind, not just a wig or something, but hiding behind a hump or, you know, or an accent or what, not being. So the idea of trying to be me was difficult and frightening. Especially frightening when I realized I had to learn to be, I had to reveal myself. And that happened in a big way at the end of this book. And it's how the next book that I've written starts. Because at the end of this book, Margaret Sullivan, that beautiful, long-legged, beautiful actress that I loved looking at, she was beautiful, man. I saw her on Voice of the Turtle in Boston at the Wilbur Theater. And 2 days after I opened in New York City with this Mark Twain Tonight thing, and nobody knew who this guy was. And the New York Times and Walter Clear and the Tribune, everybody raved about this unknown kid who was playing a 70-year-old guy. And the people I knew they didn't know what to say. They were stunned, but no more stunned than me. I was totally stunned. So 2 days after we opened, Margaret Sullivan, a beautiful actress that I love, came backstage with the wonderful playwright that wrote, I can't remember, I'll think of it someday. And she stood in the lobby of this little crummy place I was in, and she said, looking at me with those gray blue eyes, "What are you going to do now, Mr. Holbrook?" I said, I knew what she meant. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "How will you ever find another character as rich as this? How are you going to top this?" Bong.
Wow.
That was like somebody gave me the death knell. And and because of that, I had suddenly begun to realize that I created not a monster, but I created a kind of monster because nobody, I was 34 years old, and the best critics in New York thought I was 70 years old. And nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew what I looked like. They didn't know who I was. They knew nothing about me. And now, I had placed myself in a trap. I was in a trap of tremendous overnight success. I mean, every newspaper, Newsweek, Life magazine did 7 pages, pictures. I mean, everywhere. I was trapped in the body of an old man, and nobody knew who I was. And now I had to try to escape this and create a career for Hal Holbrook, whoever the hell he was. And that's how the second book begins.
Amazing. So, I mean, I didn't realize this when I started reading it, but the book actually ends with the beginnings of Mark Twain Tonight. And I found it so fascinating how you began to learn who Twain was. And this is, we don't remember this now because of the internet, where you can find everything online, that you had to go dig up obscure Twain essays and political writing and letters.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the research that you did to create this show and how it changed every night. And I wondered if you could just talk about that a little bit, how you got to know Twain, the thinker, and the political mind, and the satirist, how much rage he had, and how you did that research.
Well, I still don't resort to the internet. I pick up a book. My books are well marked. They've fallen apart. I have many dozens of books of Twain. When I decided to do, because I was desperate to make a living, and a man who I knew, because of certain events I knew, was the son of Mark Twain's lecture manager. And I went to him for advice, and he said, "Why don't you do a solo?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Twain." "A solo? You mean go out on the stage alone?" And he just looked at me. He was not a demonstrative guy. He was very straight. He said, "I think you could get bookings. Period. That's it." I walked out of the. I stood on 44th Street and watched the cars going by and thought, "Oh my God, what am I going to do?" Well, I was desperate to get bread on the table. I was desperate. I didn't have any money. Nobody paid any attention to me. So I went to the Argosy bookstore on 59th Street I'd passed it several times, has 2 windows, dusty windows. And I finally went in and I said, where is the Mark Twain? They said, upstairs in the far corner. And I went up and I looked at all these books. I'd never read anything by Mark Twain. I don't think I even read Tom Sawyer. And I started looking at these books. Well, now I picked out Huckleberry Finn. I heard of that. I looked it open and I saw the word nigger. I put it down, put it back. So I took Tom Sawyer home. Oh, Tom Sawyer. What's Tom Sawyer? So I took it home, and I was feeling really low. You know, I didn't have any encouragement from anybody. My wife, Ruby, had a very bad nervous breakdown and gone to Canada and had electric shock treatments. And everything changed. So we got a little baby and we got this situation. That was it. So the home life was really bad. And I started reading this Tom Sawyer, and about page 3, I started feeling better.
Wow.
I don't do anything from Tom Sawyer in my show because it's not a kid's show. It never was. but you know, I read the book and it made me feel good. So I went back to the Argosy and I started looking for other books. I got Huckleberry and I read it. And I thought, boy, this is a rather extraordinary take on racism because nobody in this book realizes they're a racist. They're all racist, just as nice as can be, and they don't even know it. That sounded very familiar to me.
Right.
Very, very familiar to me. And then I started looking for books like about Twain. And I saw this book, 1955, by a professor at the, New York University, called Mark Twain, Social Critic. And I thought, that sounds social critic. I didn't know he was a social critic. Well, Mark Twain is a social critic. I thought he wrote Tom Sawyer. So I took it down. I started opening it up. I thought, geez, this is something. Wow. I took it home. And I started reading Mark Twain's Social Critic. And I found out a cannon's load stuff about this man who was born on the frontier of Missouri, who went down the river on a steamboat, who went out to the gold fields, who grew up as a journalist here in San Francisco, which was a tremendous energy fountain for journalism way back then. Before the Civil War and during the Civil War, Bret Hart, everybody. These people weren't kidding around out here. They really let you have it. And then he went east, and you know, he became eventually a very. And this man grew up just at the time, not unlike a time that we are in now. And there's where I began. This book, when I read it, wasn't now. It was back in the 1950s. So what's happening now hadn't happened. But that's only an example of the many, many things that Mark Twain's life covered and his commentary covered. Because he became the most famous author in America in 1869, 1870, with Innocents Abroad. It was the first, most successful book ever sold in America. He was somebody. 1870 was the beginning of General Grant's tenure as president. I don't want to put myself against anybody politically. I don't do that because you can't convince anybody if you talk to the choir. So yes, I'm a liberal-minded man, but my wife, Dixie, was a born-bred Republican, and her family is, and they love me. Communist though I am, they love me, and I love them. So you can't convince America if you get down one road. But in the 1870s, Mr. Grant was taken over by the Republican Party. And this country, from the gold rush, then the end of the Civil War, the connection of the railroads, which Lincoln okayed, this country, in a period of 30 to 40 years, became an industrial giant. From being an agrarian country of farms and farmers, that's all we were. In 30 or 40 years, the most extraordinary development of any country in history, really. We became an industrial giant. And the people who owned it, they didn't just run it, they owned it. It was Mr. Carnegie, Mr. Vanderbilt, Jay Gould, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Frick, and Mark Twain knew every one of them. And he belonged to the same clubs in New York. They all got up and gave speeches. They didn't have television then. He knew them all. When he went home and wrote, sometimes he wrote in disguise, like Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court.
Right.
One of the lines in King Arthur's Court, one of the lines is, an aristocracy, a privileged class, is merely a band of slaveholders under another name. Now, he was writing about ancient English history, sort of.
Yeah.
But he was writing about what was going on in his country because he saw that the government in our country was being taken over by, as naturally it would, the people who created this tremendous industrial power became extremely wealthy, of course, and they really took over the government. In 1904 or 5, these are facts. I'm not going liberal or whatever, but these are just facts. And the important thing to me about doing Twain, and the thing that I get great pleasure, I don't want to pound anybody over the head. You know, you can't go to Fargo, North Dakota, and Seguin, Texas, and New York City, and you're not going to meet the same people. And if you want to talk to people, you can't just be narrow-minded. Now, you got to remember my wife, Dixie, who was a terrific, wonderful human being, and a dyed-in-world Republican.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this little sentence interested me because I thought, how did you even create the characters? So you write, Twain had acted out selections himself on stage. So I was acting Mark Twain, who was acting Huck, who was impersonating a couple of Arkansas loafers and Boggs and Sherburne and a voice in the lynch mob. A triplex of impersonations for a 34-year-old actor, and control was important to get it near to being right. And I thought, how did you, at that age, create that weird series of characters within Mark Twain?
Well, I thought about it for a while, and I thought about some kind of awkward ways to do it. I thought, that doesn't work. So maybe the way to do it is to create the different characters, like the boy, Huck, just a young, not ignorant, but totally uneducated, juvenile delinquent. He's a totally uneducated, juvenile delinquent. A hell of a lot smarter than he knew he was, but that he didn't know. Sherburne was a big, powerful guy, and Boggs, that he shot, was a total drunkard. Huck's father is a drunken racist. The speech that Huck's father gives about the free nigger from Ohio, I mean, it is the most extraordinary racist speech you could ever get. Anybody who hears it cannot take umbrage at using the word nigger in Huckleberry Finn, because it is the most powerful word in the book and the most powerful word in this speech, because it says racism, racist, in the biggest letters you could possibly say. You could never say it in a better way than this guy. And so what I did was try to create the different characters. Huck's father, drunkard. There was a free nigger from Ohio. There's a free nigger from Ohio. I forget it all, but anyway, I just create that, and then I would have these characters, and then I would just think about being old.
And somehow
I would have the characters, and then I would just think about being old. I'm working on a new Huck number now. It's my 5th or 6th number. It has to do with the feud, the Grangerfords and Shepardson feuds. It's a
interesting.
I tried to work on it about 30 years ago, and I gave up. But I've been doing it now, and Joyce, who's out there, she thinks it's good. My stage manager does.
Unbelievable.
It's really extraordinary. It really has something to say about guns. The stupidity of this feud. And this young boy, Huckleberry, who fell off the steamboat and gets involved in this family, and he never heard about a feud, and he hears about it, and he watches this feud happen. And these people killing each other. Killing each other.
So what's so amazing listening to you is that although Margaret Sullivan worried you that you were going to be entrapped by Twain, in fact, it feels as if for your life as an artist, Twain has been this well that you can keep dipping into and finding greater and greater riches.
Well, I'm very grateful, and I have my own little repertory company.
You do.
But when I opened in New York in 1959,
right.
and Margaret Sullivan said that my whole focus was I had to decide, what are you going to do now? That's what she said. What are you going to do now? I have to make a career for myself as an actor. I don't want to be a solo actor. I don't want to be Mark Twain. Wait a minute, Holbrook. You came to this town with $200 in the bank. You got a marriage that's falling apart. Now you have 2 children. You've already had an affair with somebody you feel so bad and guilty about. You came out here and tried to climb Mount Shasta all by yourself, and you'd never been alone in the wilderness overnight, and you're frightened of bears. You were there 4 days, all alone, and damn near scared yourself to death. Okay, so are you going to give this thing up? Are you crazy? This is money in the bank. Okay, but how am I going to parlay this, get the money in the bank, and also have a career as an actor, as me? So that was my challenge, and I worked hard at it. And my first play was two years after I opened. I did a German play that was a terrible success with George Voskovec, but it was an interesting thing. And the next thing I did was Abe Lincoln in Illinois for the Phoenix Theater, and I got my makeup kit out, and I totally transformed myself. And it was really a success. And Harold Clurman, who was a great theater man, and not only that, but a really great critic. In his review, he ended it with precious words to Hal Holbrook. Precious words. He said, "This young man is an actor." I tell you, man, I could eat on that for years and years. Hal Clurman said. So that gave me a
right.
thing. And then I was taken into the original Lincoln Sutter Repertory Company,
That's
which
a great
lasted for
story.
3 years down. And the first time we were reading a play, Bob Whitehead was there, Kazan was there, Jose Quintero was there, and Harold Clurman. Those were people who were directing our plays. And Harold Clurman was reported to have said to Bob Whitehead at the table, "Who is that young man down at the end?" Whitehead said, "That's Hal Holbrook." And Harold Clurman said, "My God, I've never seen him out of makeup."
Right. They thought you were an old man. Yeah.
Yeah, because they thought I was an old man.
Now, how did it feel to start to do Twain as you got older and were much closer to the age that Twain really was when he performed? Did that change your conception of the character, of his voice?
I'm not aware of it, but you can't be 88 years old and pretend to be a boy. I'm not aware of it. I tell you what I am aware of now. I'm aware of being very old. I'm aware of being very old. I'm aware of having a limited supply of energy. I'm aware of having strength that drains away too quick. I'm aware my balance is not what it was before. I fell down, 3 years ago. Joyce, my assistant for 25 years, 26 years, is sitting out there. She's been a great friend of mine and a great help. And I fell down and I broke my leg, and up here in the connection between the pelvic thing and the fractured in 3 places. But by God, I got back on the stage in 3 months.
Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Yeah. And you still, I introduced Hal to our young MFA students at ACT last night, and they were totally overwhelmed by your stature and strength, the scale of your voice, which you write in the book about how you hate it that actors are always mic'd now and that you loved going to the theater hearing those beautiful voices, hearing actors really speak who had instruments, which is not what is true of anymore, right, in the American theater. So they were amazed. And then you closed the party. So I would say your energy's pretty good. So I think we should turn it over to you all for a moment. I'm sure there are things you would love to ask Mr. Holbrook, and I think if you raise your hand, like right here, the microphone will come to you. Yeah.
I'd like to know if you visited Mark Twain's boyhood home in Hannibal, Missouri, and if that influenced your portrayal of the character, given that those were his formative years.
What was that again?
Did you visit?
About Hannibal,
did you go to Hannibal, Missouri, to the home, and how did that impact your understanding?
Well, I had read a great deal, about him before I went to Hannibal. Before I did the solo, I was doing this 2-person sketch with my wife, Ruby. And we went to the home in Hannibal. And I was still trying to create the character in this sketch, in the two-person show. This is before I did the solo, before that man said, I think you could get bookings, you know, before I had a baby, before we moved to New York. And we visited the home. And they had a little film in there of Mark Twain. It's no sound. It was made by I forget the man's name, but made at Stormfield, his home, about 1907 or 8. And it's really fast, like Charlie Chaplin kind of, you know. And I was I was getting serious about who this guy really was. Mm. And so we were going from Arkansas over to Louisiana, I think, and there was a ferry boat, like a steamboat. Mm. And I said, let's take the steamboat. She said, Ruby said, Hal, please don't turn into, you know. I said, well, let's take the steamboat. So we did. And I walked around the decks. I went up to the captain's. I didn't realize you weren't supposed to go to the pilot house. They were pretty nice to me. And I went over and I walked around the deck. And I noticed that when you walked around the deck and let yourself go, the outboard leg will throw out. Ah. Because the deck is slanted to let the water run out. So if you walk just naturally around a deck of a steamboat, your outboard leg will throw out a little. And I knew that he did certain things because he was a born actor, really. And so I incorporated that for a long time. I don't fool with it now. But, you know, that's the kind of thing. But that's something I got from the first time I went to Hannibal. Mm. The thing that I have been connected with Hannibal over the years, especially in the last, 10 years or so, Joyce, you know, our friend, you know, we've been connected more with Hannibal. They're slowly they're slowly bringing that place up to
the 20th century, if not the 21st.
The 20th century, you know. It was all about a cave and making money and all the gas stations, you know, and named Mark Twain. They have there's a couple of really wonderful curators there who are bringing that place up to the 20th century. Because the main thing we have to bring Mark Twain out of the cave. We have to bring Mark Twain out of the cave and realize that there really is nobody who can quite surpass him as a social critic of the American experience, the American people. If you don't believe it, you just start reading. And he has a great, I mean, it's not just dry history. You know, he hands you something that happened 150 years ago. And I don't update the material. I never have updated it, but I made this pact with myself the minute I started doing the solo. Never update the material. Try to make people think they're looking at the old guy. The audience updates it.
That's right.
The audience listen to this. This is a little paragraph from the Huckleberry Finn number that I am working on now about the duel, about the feud, these two feuding families. They're killing each other off. And Huck has just found out from the young boy Buck that, well, who started? He doesn't know who started. How long has it been? Oh, 30 years. He doesn't. Who started first? I don't know. How do I know? Well, how long has this been going on? Well, I'm having something like 30 years, I reckon. Well, how many people have been killed? Well, right smart chance of funerals. Well, anybody killed this year? Yeah. We got one and they got one. Bomb. Now, the next thing is, on Sunday, listen to this. On Sunday, we went to church. Everybody brought their guns and held them between their knees or set them handy against the wall. The Shepherdsons brought theirs too. That's the other feuding family. It was a pretty honorable sermon about brotherly love and such like tiresomeness. But everybody said it was a good sermon, and he talked about it on the way home and had a powerful lot to say about good works and God's grace and such like, and it did seem to be one of the roughest Sundays I ever come across. Now, here's this little boy. That's his commentary. He's not a politician. He's not a senator or a politician or a great literary mind. But a literary mind that was great wrote that. And that's a little lesson right there about how utterly stupid and ridiculous the human race can be.
Oh, man. All right, what else would you like to know?
Okay, next question on the left.
Mr. Holbrook,
Yeah?
what do you feel is your greatest accomplishment in life?
Oh, my goodness. What do you feel is your greatest accomplishment in life? That's a small one.
My greatest. Still being alive. No, my greatest accomplishment in life. I honestly cannot answer the question because I don't think of myself as having achieved a great accomplishment. I can tell you what I think is the greatest gift I ever had in my life. And her name is Dixie Carter.
Yeah.
Because Dixie Carter taught me how to just be more human. And Dixie Carter was so kind and smart as a whip and tough and generous and intelligent. She was very loving woman, sexy, and she could make you feel good. She accepted you for who you were. Dixie Carter, you know, I just created a couple of new numbers of Mark Twain this summer because I didn't have any work and I didn't want to I didn't want to get dull. So I created two new numbers. One of them is about rich and the poor and the beginning of the labor movement, but the other one is about the Christian Bible. The Christian Bible. I've been thinking of doing something on the Christian Bible for some years because Mark Twain had one hell of a lot to say about the Christian Bible.
Oh, he sure did, yeah.
And I knew I would have Dixie Carter looking over my shoulder from heaven all the time. that I was fooling around with the Christian Bible. And I took that very seriously because I wanted to write something, put together something out of his work here, that would honor Dixie's beliefs, but it would clarify for people hearing it the terrible hypocrisy that has followed the Christian religion like a rabid dog from its beginnings. And in fact, has followed many a religion. The terrible hypocrisy. And
So did you make the piece?
huh?
Did you make the piece?
What?
Did you make that piece about the Bible? Are you working on that?
About that? Yes, I did. And I debuted this number in Nashville, Tennessee, where the Bibles are made.
Oh my Lord!
And many dear members of my Tennessee family drove all the way from Memphis to Nashville. It's 3.5 hours because they knew I was going to do this, and they were so interested they drove all the way. And I was very worried that I might offend them.
And?
I did not.
You did not.
I got a beautiful letter from James Carter, my nephew, a beautiful letter, which I put in this book,
Huh.
in which he explained that what I said in this thing was so true. Because it ends up, talks about one thing, but it ends up, it ends up by saying so much blood has been shed by the church because of one omission from the Bible. Thou shalt be indifferent as to what your neighbor's religion is, not merely tolerant of it, but indifferent to it. Divinity is claimed for many religions, but no religion is great enough or divine enough to add that law to its code. Because of that omission, we have made a graveyard of the globe.
Wow. So you want a tissue? Do you have time for another one, Brian?
We have time for 2 more questions, Carey.
Okay.
So the next one will be right over here on your guys' right, about midway up.
Okay.
Well, I must say that is very hard to follow. However, you have such a wonderful grasp of details and color, and I felt like I was in New York in 1955 with you. Have you been keeping journals, or is this just all stored in your brain?
Well,
That's
it's
a
a
great
little bit of
question.
both, but see this thing here in my pocket? See this little date book? This is 2013. You open this to any page, see? And you will find every day what I've been doing every day. Even the flight number and leaving time of every airplane. And I have these books going back to 1956. And also I've written a lot of letters and made a lot of notes. And I have really a great deal of research material, but I also I'm a storyteller. I keep talking. You can't shut me up. and I keep remembering things all the time. I mean, I lay in bed at night thinking, sometimes thoughts that frighten me, trying to figure out where heaven is. Is there a heaven? Where is Dixie exactly? I know she's here. I know she's right here. She's watching, she's listening right now. But I don't know where
How
that
that
is.
works.
You know, I think about what's going on with our country. Constantly, what's going on with our country. Why do people feel, some people dislike this young president we have who's black? We should be so grateful that we have finally, after all these years, arrived at a point where we can elect a black president. He's making mistakes. He's not perfect, but you know, when you stand up and you are a target for somebody throwing bombs at you, it's hard to be perfect. But anyway, I'm trying to figure out what is going on in our country. Not only because of that, but why is it that somebody who, well, I don't want to get into politics. I really don't. But try to understand, where are we going? You know, the Tea Party people, you can get angry at them if you happen to be of a persuasion, but they have a damn good point. They have a very good point. You can't dismiss the Tea Party people. Nobody can go on spending money they don't have. We know it, but where are they willing to cut? And I say to myself, I think about it all the time. Okay, you want to cut. Well, you're going to cut some of the loopholes in the tax code for oil companies? No. You're going to cut the taxes on billionaires? No. You're going to put on some more regulations on Wall Street so they don't put us in the toilet again? No.
Mark Twain.
Well, how about cutting out blue stamps or whatever your food says? How about
food stamps? Yeah.
cutting down on education for poor folks? How about, well, the poor folks are the ones, I mean, you don't have to be a communist to acknowledge the fact that what keeps me awake, it makes it hard for me to go to sleep sometimes. What is happening to my country? This country, I have been traveling 65 years now. Every single state, almost every town in this country.
Yeah, you have been in it all.
What is happening to us? I fear for us. You know, Mark Twain said something really great. I use it a lot. I'm going to quote it to you now. And you'll understand what I mean when you say Mark Twain, social critic. Great republics do not last. Whatever has been the rule in history may be depended upon to remain the rule. History repeats itself. Vast power and wealth corrupt a nation. It incites dangerous ambitions and can bring the republic down. It can pack the Supreme Court with members friendly to its purposes, run down the Congress, and crush the people's voice. This has been a strange panic. It's like a blight, a paralysis in which a mighty machine has slipped its belt and is still running and accomplishing nothing. A creepy and awful stillness has given us an atmosphere of apprehension. The phrase laying off has become common. The laying off of 1,000, 2,000 and 3,000 men has become familiar. But there is a far greater and more dangerous laying off going on all over this land. The discharging of 1 out of every 3 employees in all the small, humble shops and industries from one end of America to the other. A blight has fallen upon us. And the monarchy of the rich and the powerful are the author of it. That's it.
Wow. Should we do one more?
On that note,
We're going to finish.
On that
Okay.
note, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Thank you, audience.
You're
Thank you,
amazing.
Carey, Perloff, and thank you, Hal Holbrook.
Thank you, Hal.
Thank you very much.